This is 90.1 KPFT FM and FM HD1 Houston, with translators at 89.5 FM K208DG Galveston and 91.9 FM K220 KC Huntsville. Houston's community station, 90.1 KPFT, a Pacifica radio station.
Good morning. Happy Monday morning to everyone. Welcome to Whole Mother. I'm your host, Pat Jones, and we're at 90.1 FM in Houston, Texas. Welcome to our new listeners on Monday morning, and welcome to all of our regular listeners. Whole Mother is a voice in our community which educates and informs us. There are many decisions to be made out there as a parent, grandparent, and uncle, neighbor. Whole Mother believes that we need to always make our choices out of rational thinking, choices that are made through education, research, not out of fear, especially fear that is imposed by those who stand to gain by our choices. It is hoped that the education you receive on this show will contribute to changing the way we birth and the way we parent. All humans are born good. I've seen more than 3,000 babies come into the world, and I can tell you there are no bad babies. There are no bad humans. All babies are born exactly the same in their goodness, their innocence, their curiosity, their brilliance, their ability to love and to trust. They're all born with the same delight in the world. It doesn't matter what country they're born in, what their skin color is, or what language they're learning to speak, or how much money is in their family. We are all born with the same goodness. We all come into the world with the same potential. If that's true, that all humans are born without hate, judgment, shame, jealousy, then where do we learn those qualities if we're not born with them? Whole Mother is here to look at our parenting, which begins in the very first moment of birth. Remember that KPFT is listener sponsored and you are the listeners. That means we bring you information, education that's funded and sponsored by you. And we need your help to stay on the air. We need to see support from you to know that you want Whole Mother on the air, that you want KPFT on the air. So please go to kpft.org or call 713-526-5738. 713-526-5738. The website at Houston Area Women's Center says, "We believe in a future defined by safe relationships and caring families, when entire communities thrive free from violence. We're on a mission to make that happen." The Houston Area Women's Center serves thousands of women, children, families each year escaping domestic violence, sexual assault, or sex trafficking. We help survivors transform their lives, free from violence. Because of their courage, we are convinced that this crisis can and must be stopped. My guests this morning are Chow Wen. She's the Chief Public Strategies Center for the Houston Area Women's Center. She's tasked with managing and expanding key partnerships while positioning HAWC, as they call it, Houston Area Women's Center, while positioning HAWC as thought leaders in order to drive broad awareness of domestic violence and sexual assault with a goal of reducing interpersonal violence and changing cultural norms about how survivors are understood. Prior to her leadership in the nonprofit space, Chow spent 15 years as a television news journalist and last served as an anchor and reporter with KHOU TV. She is the first Vietnamese American journalist to receive an Emmy Award for her documentary series covering a medical mission in Vietnam, and the Houston Press has named her Reporter of the Year. Chow came to America and to Houston when she was 2 years old, escaping from Vietnam at the end of the Vietnam War with her parents and 3 siblings. As a refugee immigrant whose family settled in Houston and still calls Houston home, she is passionate about staying connected and serving her community. She is an American Leadership Forum Class 47 Fellow, was recently appointed by the city to serve on the Women's Commission, and is a regular panelist on the popular Fox 26 show, What's Your Point?, where she advocates for women, children, and families on political and social justice issues. She currently sits on the board of the University of Houston Friends of Women's Studies, and she is on the advisory board of Houston Achievement Place. Chow is a master social worker and holds a Master of Arts in Social Work from the University of Houston and a Bachelor of Arts in Communications from the University of St. Thomas. She is frequently asked to MC events, including Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner's inauguration in 2016. Chow is the proud mother of 2 young girls, Ryan and Miles, and a Shorkie, a Yorkie Shih Tzu mini named Peanut. And she is an active member of Unity of Houston. We're so pleased and honored to have you, Chow. Thank you.
Thank you.
My other guest this morning is Allie Kramer Jacobs. She serves as the Director of Counseling and Advocacy at the Houston Area Women's Center and specializes in providing trauma-informed care to survivors of domestic and sexual violence. She holds a Master in Counseling Psychology from the University of Houston and is currently enrolled in the doctoral program at the Graduate School of Social Work. With over 15 years of experience in the field of trauma, Allie has presented at the national and regional conferences, testified in the Texas Senate, and served as an expert witness in court. Welcome, both of you, to Home Mother. I'm so happy to have you here, and I don't know why we've never had you before.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
I'm so delighted.
And we're here now. We're excited to be with you.
Yes.
Just touched by your introduction.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for
Thank you.
shining a light on this really important issue in our community.
Yes. Thank you so much. All right. Well, tell us about HAWC, Houston Area Women's Center. I'd like our audience to know all about it and what does it do. And so your turn.
Yeah. So you shared a little bit about our mission and our vision. We do believe in a future defined by safe relationships and caring families, where our entire community can thrive free from violence. The Houston Area Women's Center has deep roots in this community, starting in 1977. That's when it first opened its doors, if you can believe it or not. Next year will be our 45th year of doing life-saving work in this community with Allie and her team. And I can tell you, I did a little research recently about the Houston Area Women's Center. It was born from a movement. In 1977, the National Women's Conference came to Houston. Female delegates from all over the country came together and said, we need to address issues like social injustice issues like violence against women. I'm so sorry, that's my dog.
And as I said, at least it's yours, not mine.
Sadie, stop. And so it came at a time where women were escaping abuse and didn't have a place to go. And so the women's advocate in the city of Houston, our first leader at the time, Nikki Hightower, was getting those phone calls into the city of Houston. Women were escaping abuse. And, at the time, sadly, some of that is still around today. Domestic violence was in the dark, right? People didn't want to talk about it. So they would call and say, I'm in an abusive relationship. I don't have a place to turn. And so it was born from a few volunteers and a few phone lines and trying to place women in situations where they can be safe. So from that, in the 44 plus years that Houston Area Women's Center has been born, we now have a 24/7 free and confidential hotline. We offer crisis support, including shelter, counseling, advocacy. We empower survivors to build their lives free from violence and have a breadth of services that HAWC provides, including what I just mentioned. We support people. Our rape crisis program supports people at the hospital. And we know that if we can support survivors, we can get to that threshold where they can thrive free from violence. And we know that this is a public health crisis. Look, we're looking at a pandemic right now, but the public health crisis of violence is pervasive, but it is preventable. We have some predictors, and Allie can share some of those predictors for violence because she's been doing this work as an advocate for many, many years.
Yeah, thanks, Chow. It's amazing to, having been at the agency for so long, it's still breathtaking to me, and awe-inspiring to hear the history that this movement came out of women supporting women, and that someone choosing to make a change really has this a ripple effect in our community, and the fact that the agency has been around supporting survivors for that long, it's just amazing to be part of that history. To kind of build on what Chow said, we know that domestic and sexual violence is preventable because it is predictable. So there are some personality characteristics that we commonly see in an individual who chooses to use violence. Just because an individual has one of those characteristics doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to be abusive. But it's so important to remind listeners that violence is a choice, that the individual is choosing to use violence. So if we can recognize that there's prevention measures, primary prevention gets at teaching our youth, teaching our young people, kind of to tie it into this amazing introduction that you have in Whole Mother, that people are born good, and that, abuse can be a learned behavior, but learning and our minds are beautiful. Like the neuroplasticity of our brains, change is possible, rewiring is possible. So we have the opportunity to be involved in primary prevention, to have conversations with our youth, but there's secondary prevention, tertiary prevention, that we have the opportunity to engage in, and really supporting individuals who have been impacted by violence, and making sure that we're providing safe spaces for their stories to be heard, for their stories to be validated and normalized, for them to hear we believe you is so important. But also support is available, and really creating those spaces where they feel supported, where healing can take place, and healing for a mother changes healing for a child, which changes healing for a family, which changes healing for our community. So there is a huge ripple effect in that is really inspiring.
Yes. I personally believe that no one hurts another person unless they've been hurt themselves, that it gets passed on. And that's the part we have to heal, is what happened to us.
It's interesting you say that, Patricia, because what we know about children who experience violence or witness violence is that they either become a victim themselves in the future, or they become the abuser themselves. So Allie talks about that early intervention, teaching kids healthy relationships. So important, because like she said, violence and abuse are learned behaviors. Those are lived experiences, and those can be changed, right?
Yes.
You're not born into
That's
being
right.
abused. You're born into being, abuse. And I think the other thing I think would be important for your listeners is, one of the things I hear so much is, what is domestic violence? And people often assume domestic violence is physical violence, the bruises you see, the wounds, the physical wounds. But we know that domestic violence is more than just that. It's emotional, it's verbal, it's financial, it's spiritual. And at the root of all these issues are power and control, somebody wielding their control and power over somebody else. And so to me, it almost seems like and Allie can speak more to it because she actually, works with the clients. It's almost a surprise to people to think, well, I would never hit a person. Well, once you get to the physical violence, there are probably a myriad of things that preclude the physical violence, that power control, the emotional, the words, the isolation. And so on our website at hawc.org, we actually have a checklist because a lot of people who call our hotlines have no idea that they're in an abusive relationship. They're trying to just navigate, that interpersonal relationship they have. And it's a checklist. Like, are there threats? Is he checking on your phone? Is he saying unnice things to you? And so the power and control, the opportunity to educate people and raise awareness about what domestic violence is so important because so many people don't even know they're in an abusive situation.
Absolutely. I think one of the most frequent questions that we hear on our hotlines is this abuse? Women and callers are knowing that in their gut, like something doesn't feel right. This isn't normal, but there isn't a validation of that. As a society, we're not really engaged in that. We're not engaged in a conversation about what a healthy relationship is for us to even start the conversation about what an unhealthy relationship is. Our youth are often like taught through media about what a healthy relationship is. And when you sit back as a mother myself and watch the media, I'm like, dang, there ain't no consent anywhere in any of this. Like, we're not providing those opportunities. There's a new book actually that's coming out by Rachel Snyder. And the title of it is No Visible Bruises. So it's one of kind of this education to our society about what an unhealthy relationship is, what domestic violence is so important. So we start having that conversation about emotional abuse. Most of the survivors, now we do have, individuals who experience physical violence right away in their relationship. Now I don't want to say that is, never happens because that's not the case, but most of our survivors are coming in with this, kind of emotional, psychological, verbal abuse, like this breakdown of an individual's support system, the breakdown of an individual's self-esteem, the manipulation and control is just slowly crafted by an abuser in amazing ways, like amazingly smart ways. They're brilliant manipulators, and they're manipulating society and the people around them as well. But we see that there's often this like breakdown of an individual and a isolation from their support system, and then the physical abuse starts. And when that is happening, the survivor is so manipulated, gaslit. I don't know if that's like an official word, but I'm going to make it one. Gaslighted by the situation, and confused because this is an individual who is using techniques like, I love you, this is your fault. If you wouldn't have done this, this wouldn't have happened. Like these phrases that are really confusing for a survivor to sit in. So we often see them calling with like, is this abuse? Like, and just being able to provide first some psychoeducation about what violence is and different forms of abuse is really kind of the first stage for an individual to like recognize their survivorship. And we see language is really important there. Like the shift of an individual to come in as a victim of domestic violence. And then after accessing services for a period of time, you start seeing in some of their, like in group, we have them introduce themselves, like why they're here. You'll start seeing people like, I'm a survivor of domestic violence. Like you see this healing, the language and the empowerment that just naturally comes. It's a beautiful process.
Very good. Tell us a little more. What causes abuse? What happens?
Yeah. What causes it? I mean, the cause is down at the root is going to be power and control. It is an individual choosing to use tactics in order to gain power and control. We see this like current of terror of an individual creating this space that is unhealthy, that is violent, in ways to gain power and control. And it is done through some of these measures that we've talked about, like using children, through reproductive rights, through emotional abuse, through economic abuse, financial abuse. And really, there is no like set prescribed. Abusers find ways to gain power and control. These are common things. There's a wheel of violence that we'll use that we kind of talk about these different tactics, but individuals who choose to use violence find very creative ways to gain power and control over an individual and to create this current of terror that really keeps an individual in that situation. Yeah.
Chow, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think that to Allie's point, when people are abusers, they may not even recognize that they're abusing themselves because of the trauma they've suffered in childhood. Again, it is a learned behavior. There is a partner agency that we work with at the Houston Area Women's Center called AVDA, the Aid to Victims of Domestic Abuse. And they do have a battery intervention prevention program in which they work with abusers and perpetrators to educate them about what's gone wrong, because many abusers might deny that they're being abusive. And so it's really important to raise that awareness and education anytime we talk about, what causes violence, where does abuse come from, what it is and what it's not. One of the other things I wanted to share with your listeners is the barriers to leaving. We often hear, why doesn't a person just leave? It's so easy for the outsider, the bystander, to go, oh my gosh, you're in an abusive relationship and you should just leave your abusers. Well, oftentimes it's really not that easy. And that's what we know because of the clients we serve. There are two major barriers. One is you might have children and he's the breadwinner. And the biggest barrier is economics. It's money. How am I going to provide for myself? And so we know with a lot of survivors we see, it is very hard to extricate your relationship when you're trying to navigate the complexities of, where am I going to live? Who's going to provide for me and my children? Where am I going to go? Those are very complicating and extreme barriers to leaving. And so what I would say to somebody who knows somebody who's navigating an abusive relationship, don't say, just leave him, because it comes across as really judgmental. It almost feels like the survivor feels blamed. And so he or she might isolate themselves from sharing that information. Instead, you can respond with, listen, you don't deserve this. We believe you. There is help. And that's the refer, right? Organizations like the Houston Area Women's Center, very easy to connect with us. HAWC.org. We have a live chat. We have a 24/7 hotline you can call that's free and confidential. That number is 713-528-2121. And I can say that again, 713-528-2121. And at HAWC.org, you can live chat. So if you're not feeling safe, you can text and you can say, I really want to get out of this situation, or I want to talk about this. We're never going to blame you. We're never going to judge you. Our counselors are there to listen, and you are the expert at your own destiny. You know what's best for you and your kids, and we can offer tools to provide you if you choose to leave. And by the way, leaving, that's our other big awareness push that Allie and I talk about relentlessly. Right now, as you know, Patricia, we are facing some very violent times in our community, not just with crime, but with domestic violence related crimes. From what we know, homicides are up. We had a news conference for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This is the last day of October, but all month long, we've been recognizing and honoring survivors as part of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. We're facing some very, very violent times. There have been recorded at the Houston Police Department 44 domestic violence related murders, 42 of them involve guns. So these are serious times, and we want people to know that they need to get to a safe place, because when you decide to leave, when you have that courage to leave, it may not be always the safest time. In fact, it can be the most dangerous time. That leaving does not equate safety. That leaving, and there's a gun in the house, again, 42 of those murders were committed with a gun, could lead to murder, to homicide. So you've got to learn to plan for your safety. And we can help you do that by calling our hotlines. Our advocates, Allie, her team, can help you plan for your safety. Should you decide, you know what, this is the right time to leave. Safety planning involves a myriad of things. It's individualized. Where are my keys? You know, how do I plan for my kids to get out of the house? Do I have my proper paperwork? Is there a code word in the house? Do I know where the gun is stored? Safety planning can plan for saving your life.
I think one of the things that's so important to add into that is oftentimes when survivors are planning to leave, that is again, as Chow said, the most dangerous time, because that is the ultimate threat to an abuser's power and control. And in that, there's fear. That is change in and of itself is a scary process for most of us, but now you're talking about change in a crisis situation. So fear is really elevated. And in that, what we know about in our brains through hard science is that our prefrontal cortex, like this reasoning, this logical, this planning part of our brain, is actually inaccessible. It's offline. So support is available to think of ideas, to help an individual craft a unique safety plan, recognizing their power, recognizing what's in their control, and recognizing them as the expert. What seems like a safe plan for me, like grab your keys and run out the door, is not always safe for other individuals. So giving us space to say, you are believed. Let's take some deep breaths. Let's reconnect like our bodies and our minds to our spirits, and let's plan this together. Support is available, is really important to make sure that we get a survivor to and her children to a safe space where that healing can happen. You can't heal if you're in an emotionally unsafe place, and you can't even talk about emotions when you're in a physically unsafe place. So getting a survivor to that space, whatever that may be, like an undetermined, that is the survivor gets to define what safety is and what a safe place is just so important for that healing process. And again, that changed the trajectory of her healing path, and it changes the developmental trajectory of her children.
It's very important work you're doing here. One of my mind is thinking about a woman who's wanting to leave and who reaches out to you, and you provide her with a place to go and a way to feed and house her children. But what about if she has to go to work or go see her family or her friends? What protects her in that way? How is she protected?
Absolutely. So our shelter is at an undisclosed location. It is intended to be a safe environment. Shelter is not you come in and you stop your everyday safe life. Like your means to establishing a life, a sustained sense of safety and healing. Things like that are incredibly important, having that job. So what we're going to do in those locations is helping a survivor safety plan. What's a way that she can advocate for herself, maybe with her employer, to change her hours? So it's not where she's working, 9 to 5 every single day. Maybe if we switch it up and we do 11 to 8, and then the next day is, 8 to 5. So creative ways that empower a survivor to still reach their goals, but with safety components added into it. So looking at ways like, how about we take a different route to work? How about we change the times? Really just a unique safety plan for that individual, so they can still do the things that we use the term like filling our buckets in our house, so that she can still do the things that fill her bucket and make her feel good, that increase healing financial stability is crucial to sustaining this pattern of long trajectory of healing. A life, self-sustaining life, finances is going to be incredibly important. But increasing support systems, so like having the ability to go talk to family and do those things that really support healing. These are coping skills, right? So just safety planning around it, and we have advocates and counselors available within the shelter to work one-on-one with a survivor to have her be heard, to help her meet her needs. We're not swooping in and rescuing anybody and saying like, I have the plan and this is what is going to be best, but sitting alongside in the space with the survivor to see her, to hear her, and to provide aid and bolster the strengths that she already has. Like, she knows what she needs to do. We're just here to say, this is a great idea. What about these options, to sit alongside in that process, because she knows what's best for her. She knows her goals.
Yeah. My other thought is, how do you help her with embarrassment about it, the shame? Will everyone now know about this? And
yeah, so shame is real. I want to validate the kind of universal experience of shame. And I think what is so important is to acknowledge it, to talk about it, to have connection through it, recognizing that we can connect through that emotion. And that connection is what fuels healing. So in any of the kind of healing spaces and the therapeutic spaces that we create for survivors and within our services, we're not here to gather like the nitty gritty details. If a survivor wants to share those, like, I feel honored to hear them. But I don't need the nitty gritty details for healing to happen, because healing happens through connection, and connection happens through emotion. So being able to create spaces in which conversation can happen to say, like, how did that make you feel? And to have that normalized, like to be able to say, like, I've also felt this, or, oh my gosh, I have felt, X, Y, Z when this happened. To have that validated, it's not about necessarily the experience, the event of domestic violence. It is the healing that can happen in connection, in recognizing that you're not the only one, in recognizing that others have experiences, and the connection that can happen through feelings is so crucial. So that shame, that is real. That is real because survivors have existing in this rape culture where we blame survivors, but then also the shame that the individual who's choosing to use violence has like also dumped these shames. You're not a great wife. You're not a good worker. You're not a good mother. Like that just gets the snowball kind of going in the shame. So being able to acknowledge shame and let's talk about it. Shame is, again, an emotion that we don't talk about in society.
yes.
Patricia, I just had this conversation about shame with a friend of mine who's a recovering alcoholic. And he said, in one of his support groups, he said, the counselor said, you are not bad people. And he said, excuse me. And everybody in that room felt, had this feeling like, what did you say? You're not a bad person? Because shame makes you believe you're a bad person, yes. Right? And you're not a bad person. You are not defined by the abuse that took place. You're not defined by the words he said or she said. You're not defined by that. You're not a bad person. Did bad things happen? Yes, but you're not a bad person. It was very, very visceral to him. And he said, shame is the thing that holds people back, that prevents them from growing and evolving and being empowered.
So what would you say to someone listening to the show right now who's experiencing some shame, maybe frozen in some ways, can't move forward?
I think acknowledging the words that I would want them to hear is, you're not at fault. You are not to blame. This was someone's choice and you are not at fault, that you're believed, that support is available, that shame, again, just as Chow said, you are not a bad person. Something bad happened and support is available for that. But just a survivor to hear, you're not to blame for this. There's so much self-guilt and self-blame that survivors come in with because of that manipulation, that control, that when they hear those words, the physical reaction to that, it is heavy. It is so important that they hear that they are not to blame for what took place.
Yes. I think this is part of the answer to the question, why can't people just leave? Is there a little more to that also besides the shame that someone feels?
I think it speaks to the barriers to leaving. It's the economics, the pressures of having children. We hear from clients that the number one barrier is economics. It's financial. It's very scary if your partner, your intimate partner, is the breadwinner and is threatening you with the kids and with money. We also know that single women and survivors of domestic violence are one of the largest growing homeless women in this country. Homelessness is a real issue. And so at HAWC, we provide not only emergency shelter, but an opportunity to live a life free from violence, to gain independence through our housing program, so that the steps towards living a life free from violence is getting a roof over your head, having some financial stability, looking at your career options so that you can provide for yourself and your family. That's a huge barrier to leaving.
I think another barrier that we hear frequently from survivors too is love. There is love there. That there is a commitment, that there is a loyalty, that there is a love in it. And what we have to kind of tease apart is that love is not violence. That love is supposed to fill your bucket, like to kind of use the words that we use at in my house. Love is supposed to fill your bucket, not dip your bucket and take out of that. But when we don't, and this is why, again, primary prevention is so important, and having conversations about what a healthy relationship is, because we are not taught what healthy is, to know what love isn't. And I think survivors come in with, but I love him. And that is a barrier to ending a relationship. Grief, the process of going through loss, the loss of a relationship, the loss of an idea of a relationship, the loss of the idea of happiness, the loss of, the family unit that we kind of protect in society as this, defined small secular group of greatness is family, and being able to be, process through all that, I think is just so important, because those are heavy emotions, like the shame, the grief, the loss, all of that is the lack of love, the redefining of what love means. All that is heavy, right? It needs to be kind of carefully thought through and processed in a safe environment, in a compassionate environment, in a non-judgmental environment. And everyone has the ability to do that, maybe in different ways. But I think that's what's so fantastic about kind of HAWC uses this term kind of 3 R's, is recognizing when there is abuse, knowing kind of what domestic violence is, which we talked a little bit about. It's not just physical, it's also emotional, recognizing when someone is hurting. The next is going to be responding. So using words like, I believe you, you're not to blame, things that you've heard us say. And then referring. No one has to be the expert on this. This is what HAWC is. This is what the Houston Area Women's Center for 44 plus years in our community, we are the experts in it, referring to say, hey, support is available. You should call this hotline. So those 3 R's are so important, because everyone in our community can stand up for survivors, which is really empowering to recognize the strength that we can wrap around our survivors.
Yes. That brings up another question for me. So if I know someone that I think is in a domestic violence situation or any kind of situation where I know something is not right, what can I do? Get some advice to our community. How can we help someone that we see looks like they might be having some troubles?
That is so important, Patricia. I got to tell you, I probably get a call weekly or an email or a message about a friend of a friend and they don't know what to do. How do I navigate? She's going through this. I always refer them to our hotline and to our chats. Our counselors are the experts. They can help talk through maybe a bystander or a friend or the survivor about what's going on. It goes back to what Allie's saying. It's that recognize, there's signs of abuse, isolation, taking away your phone, jealousy, threats, intimidation. And you kind of know if something's going on and it's not right, right? Mm-hmm. And then to respond, listen without judgment, let them know that they didn't deserve this, that they should be believed. And then finally to refer, tell them help is available. Go to our website, hawc.org. Have them call the hotline. That number 713-528-2121. And I think those are really important messages that we should always share with somebody who's going through an abusive relationship. Again, not saying, just leave him. How could he do this? That doesn't create, as Ali said, that connection. Oftentimes it creates judgment and isolation.
And more shame.
More shame, yeah.
I'm supposed to have a wonderful relationship and I'm supposed to be in charge of it. And I'm a failure now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think too, like why questions. We live in a society that wants a lot of information. We want to know kind of what's going on. And our go-to is why. Why did you stay? Why didn't you leave? Why are you letting this happen? Like these why questions can be really valuable in collecting information and need to be used in appropriate situations. And when you're interacting with a survivor, anytime we start asking why, oftentimes we come from a space of like defending ourselves or it feels judgmental. So making sure that we're avoiding like why questions. We don't want to also say like, I know what's best for you, because the fact of the matter is I don't. The survivor knows what's best for them. So again, recognizing, responding in a way that is supportive. I believe you. Thank you for sharing this with me. Statements that really validate, but also offer a lot of support to an individual. That can change the trajectory. We know that if a supportive interaction after the first disclosure of these traumatic experiences, if that first interaction is successful, and I'm going to, air quote successful, what successful would be is feeling supported, feeling validated, feeling that it's not judged, that survivor is going to be more likely to disclose to other individuals, which is going to launch their healing. It's going to be an opportunity for them to get connected to services. And I think that is so important, is really, using words that a survivor needs to hear. Support. Thank you for sharing. That must've been really hard. Really just bolstering them up, in a way that the perpetrator, that the individual who chooses violence just has not done.
Yes. Very good. Anything else, Troy, you want to add here?
One of the areas I did want to address is just some facts about domestic violence and the survivors we serve. We are a multiracial and multilingual agency. We support survivors despite their religious or socioeconomic situation. There is no look to a survivor. They don't look a certain way. They are you and me. And a lot of the survivors we support at HAWC come from areas of oppression, whether it be race or class. We serve a lot of survivors through Allie's counseling program who are Latino or Hispanic descent. And then at our shelter, half of the clients who receive crisis emergency shelter identify as Black. And we know that's because they come from communities of color because of intersections of oppression, whether it be class, race, socioeconomics. It's really important to shed and shine a light on that, and to just educate our community that these communities of color are facing added barriers like domestic violence, like socioeconomic barriers, like poverty. There's a show that really kind of addresses that sort of intersection of domestic violence and poverty and children and the barriers to leaving, called Made. It's on is it on Amazon, Allie, or Netflix? Netflix. And
Yeah.
Really powerful. I just spoke to the Texans cheerleaders as part of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we had a real expansive conversation about the intersections of violence and oppression, which, race, class, and then how do you solve violence? How do you end violence? You don't end violence in a vacuum, right? In a silo. You have to address those areas as well. So I would encourage people to watch that, because it's a really in-depth look at the single mother who's trying to escape violence, who's trying to raise her child, who's trying to lift herself out of the system, right? So I want to share that with your listeners, that it's more complicated than just a survivor leaving, and it doesn't have a survivor doesn't have a certain look.
Is there anything more you might want to say about how to prevent violence?
Yeah, I will tell you, we have a violence prevention program and an education and outreach team who goes into schools and communities and trains professionals about violence prevention. And I think Allie mentioned it earlier. There's something called primary prevention, to sort of talk about abuse before it stops, right? So we get media who call us and say, well, how could we have prevented this from happening? And really, we have to start from the beginning. You want to prevent abuse, you want to prevent violence. Let's start talking to our children, from the ages of 3 up, about healthy relationships, about words, because those words can escalate to violence, right? Let's support communities of color and address things like poverty and class and racism. That's sort of the primary prevention violence lens, right? And then we look at secondary prevention, which is stopping the abuse now that it's happened, right? And a lot of our support services, shelter, hotline, we offer that. But the primary prevention, that model of talking about healthy relationships, building communities, lifting communities, is so important, because violence spills into entire communities. It might start interpersonally, but it affects the bystanders, your friends. It affects the first responders, right, who come to a family violence call. It affects hospitals. So our systems are overburdened by violence. It affects the workplace because people are taking time off work. It's everybody's problem, which is why the CDC considers it a public health crisis.
What about kids who witness violence? Is there some things you might say about words of advice about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what's so important is to recognize that our children, our youngest of our communities, are also human. They have the same emotions. They have the same capabilities as we do to witness, either see, hear, but they don't have the same communication skills. They don't have the same coping skills that we've developed over our lifetimes as adults, that we do want to provide them age appropriate awareness, education, and also spaces to heal, right? So this is going to come in where in another form of prevention, right? Not primary prevention, but when children who witness domestic violence, their brain development is actually altered, and their developmental trajectory is changed. So we know when an individual has an adverse childhood experience, so ACEs, that they pile up on them, and this is preventable if we can intervene and change that developmental trajectory to allow regulation skills, to allow learning environments to take place where connections can form in the brain, and children are incredibly resilient resilient, like just amazingly resilient. So children who witness, recognizing that they are worthy and deserving of supportive environments in the same way that our adults are. Often that's an area of shame too for a mother, that we have individuals who it's hard to be whatever society defines as a wonderful mother when you're knee deep in recovering from your trauma, when you are struggling as a mother, successfully struggling, like strengths and struggling to overcome these barriers to leaving, to overcome the healing that needs to happen after abuse. It's hard when you are dysregulated and overwhelmed and stressed and experiencing flashbacks and all this stuff that like comes, in this backpack of trauma. It's hard to be available to your children, to create learning spaces, to create meaningful moments where a lot of connection and emotional experience can happen between a mom and a child. And that can all be changed through healing and support. Like all of that can change. And children, the neuroplasticity in the brain, like it happens fast. They are so brilliantly resilient that just given the opportunity to experience that can really alter their healing. One of the things that happens in our counseling services and also at our shelters, we talk about what a healthy relationship is. So we may not have been able to prevent the violence from happening in the first place, but we can prevent it from happening again. Giving them spaces to connect, giving them spaces to be validated, and giving them the education about what a healthy relationship is, what consent is. So in society, we have the connection that consent is only about sex, but consent is about agency. It's about autonomy. It's about the rights to your body, what you want to do and not. So being able to provide them a space to learn about that, I think is so important in preventing the abuse from happening again.
Very good. We're getting close to our close. Are there some things that we haven't covered here that you'd really like to make sure our audience hears?
A lot of people call us and say, how do I get involved? How can I join and support this movement? One, just support survivors, right? It's as simple as listening, sharing, telling them our resources available. But we also have a myriad of things where people can get involved. COVID has obviously posed some difficulty for all of us, and coming in person back as we as a society are increasingly becoming more vaccinated. There are opportunities where you can volunteer, donate. We don't run this mission alone. We don't do it without the support of this entire community. Our funds, like Pacifica, we rely on the funds of the community. We have government grants, we have philanthropic dollars, but it takes support. So please consider donation. We have awareness campaigns. We're wrapping up Domestic Violence Awareness Month, in which we had a giving day. We have our young leaders. If you're a young professional, and young could be any age really, but if you want to get involved with a group of dynamic advocates and allies of the Houston Area Women's Center, we have a Young Leaders Program. We have a volunteer corps of more than 1,000 in which they come and support our events, our campaigns, volunteer opportunities on the hotlines and childcare and Allie's team. So I would encourage people, if they want to come and support and join the movement, to go to hawc.org, take a look at all the things we offer, see if there's something that interests you, and reach out to our volunteer coordinator, because we want to hear from you. The other easy way is just to join us on our social media. Follow us on Facebook at Houston Area Women's Center, Twitter, Instagram at HAWC Talk. Those are ways you can stay connected. And if you're a survivor and you're still wanting to speak out, a lot of our survivors join us as allies and as advocates. They can do so. We hear incredible stories of transformation from survivors. I just spoke to one who stayed at our shelter several years ago, who said, "Thank you, Chow. Because of this, you've been a part of my healing and my growth." And that's really incredible thing. It really goes back to Allie's sense of connection. She remembers that time living in the shelter. And now as an adult, she can pay it forward and share her story with empowerment, with survival, and say, "I'm okay. My mom's okay. Look at us."
Yes. Very good. Thank you, Chow Wynn and Allie Kramer Jacobs. Thank you for all you do. You're changing the world. One person at a time. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for allowing us to just come share the services that HAWC have, because ultimately we all have, like, to be a great listener, to be an advocate for a survivor doesn't take working at HAWC. Everyone in our community can do it, and you've provided us the opportunity to share that information.
Thank you so much. Would you tell the audience one more time how they could reach you?
Yes. So please head to our website. That is our virtual storefront. It's HAWC.org, where you can find a myriad of things, the support we offer, the services we provide, how you can join, how you can follow us on social media. And then if you're a survivor and you're listening, go to the website, live chat with us. And if you need to talk about it, head to our 24/7 free and confidential hotline at 713-528-2121.
Very good. Thank you both. You can listen to this show again and many others on wholemothershow.com or at kpft.org archives. Drug overdose deaths increased by 30% in 2020, hitting the highest number ever recorded. More than 93,000 people died from overdose last year. That's more than 250 people dying every day, more than 10 every hour. That number doesn't include people who do not die from an overdose, but are still lost to their addiction. Addiction is not a respecter of academic achievement or socioeconomic status or nice neighborhoods or gender or race or how much a family loves a person suffering from substance abuse. It is killing real people, beloved people, and it threatens others who are doing the hard work to save themselves and their loved ones. Whole Mother wishes to inspire discussion of this important issue, and we're proud to present a series on addiction. Join us on the third Monday of every month, right here on KPFT 90.1 at 11 a.m. Stay tuned to Dr. Alex Samotis. Thank you to our engineer, production coordinator. Thank you, EJ, and to Eric for all your support. Thank you out there for listening to Whole Mother. I'm Pat Jones, and this is KPFT Houston, Radio for Peace.
Clouds of white and the brightness of day. I I like the dark and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people passing by. I see friends shaking hands, shaking hands, shaking hands, shaking hands, shaking